Chen Yonglin was a Chinese diplomat based at the Sydney consulate until his defection in 2003. When I interviewed him, he authenticated his point that there were 1,000+ Chinese agents on Australian soil, but the vast majority were not actually after military technology. They were there to monitor Falun Gong and other dissidents. These Chinese infiltration activities never met with any particular governmental or intelligence resistance in the West. It was as if the battle for the Chinese diaspora had already been ceded. The U.S. intelligence community was distracted by terrorism, and it was pacified by occasional Chinese military and intelligence cooperation on terrorist networks, even if the information given was sketchy and unclassifiable, as in the case of the alleged Uyghur jihadis. Now, with no one blocking them, Chinese hackers began carrying out successful denial-of-service attacks in Taiwan in 2004. When the so-called Titan Rain attacks began at military contractors, DoD, state, and NASA in 2005, the subject of Chinese hackers began to receive wide press attention. But no explicit or U.S. sanctions followed. The rest of the world began to pay attention following the revelations of the GhostNet attacks. That's from 2007 to early 2009. These were cyber break-ins of governmental centers across the world, including the Dalai Lama's government in exile. No international sanctions or penalties followed. Instead, the attacks were subtly downplayed. The Chinese hackers' methods were understood. U.S. intelligence officials shrugged. The mob was better at this. There was no technical breakout. Yet in the Aurora attacks, if you actually look at what has emerged from them, the hackers are exhibiting something just as dangerous as technical proficiency, namely maturity. Advanced persistent threats, that is, computer infections that don't immediately exhibit symptoms but wait for a coordinated zero-day attack, require meticulous observation of idiosyncratic administrative patterns in Western psychology. We've never seen that from the Chinese hacker community before. The party, at the same time, was still looking inward. The fears of a color revolution, upticks in mass disturbances, that is, riots, Tibet uprising, shoddy schoolhouse construction in Sichuan, and the Uyghurs. And Levi went into the Olympics business and so on. But even in Aurora, it is possible to see traces of the party's internal anxiety. According to Google, the Gmail break-ins were aimed at China journalists and Western human rights activists. Now, I don't use Gmail, but Yahoo's lawyers recently called me and said there had been a rare and unusual security breach into my email account. Now, that's consistent. I smash a grab of my files in my car while I was interviewing Falun Gong practitioners in Montreal, the questioning and forced deportation of my research assistant when he tried to enter Hong Kong. In fact, Li Shai Lamish, my research assistant, was recently on a tour bus crammed with Falun Gong performers in Montreal when they discovered that the tires had been carefully slashed so that there would have been dangerous blowouts if the bus had reached highway speeds. To repeat, the State Department doesn't even bother tracking these sorts of incidents. Yet, they are showing real concern over spying and network intrusion in the party's rapidly expanding view of China's sphere of influence. That's good. Aurora did not threaten the best-kept secrets of the Pentagon, but it does put us back in the World War II convoy position where we're buying 10 ships of network protection for every hacker U-boat. But in conclusion, there's more than one reason for the explosion in Chinese hacking, and it contains the key to a successful American counter-strategy. Around the time the Clear Wisdom Net was attacked, Falun Gong was moving into a more activist stance overseas. Many practitioners, this simply meant getting the Falun Gong story out to the greatest amount of people in the shortest amount of time. Since Western journalists were not interested in performing this function, the practitioners built their own media outlets: Epoch Times, New Tang Dynasty Television, Sound of Hope Radio Network. Yet all these projects had various degrees of technical difficulty getting through to the mainland. So a couple of practitioners operating out of North Carolina saw that this media could be carried on the web anyways. The problem was simply breaking a hole in the Great Firewall. So instead of explaining and defending Falun Gong per se, they would simply try to open up the Chinese internet. Presumably the Chinese users would find the sites. And they knew how Chinese engineers had laid out the internet, and they knew the Public Security Bureau, and they knew where the Golden Shield did not patrol the firewall. So they created a massive wormhole, a place where Chinese users could surf freely. It was called DynaWeb. It was joined by other discrete practitioner systems, such as UltraReach, FreeGate, creating the Global Internet Freedom Consortium. Now, the consortium staff was purposely kept small, so there were no refugee bots in it. But they held a lot of cards. They had proxy systems that could be played in lightning successions. They even had doomsday programs which could light up China's network like a Christmas tree in a crisis. Now, that's something they're still holding on to, and it may be maybe explains why they've never gotten any physical visits from Chinese state security. Now, just before Iran's recent Green Party demonstrations, the consortium wrote up an introductory page in Farsi, and thus became the major conduit for uncensored news and information out of Iran. And so as well as allowing over 500,000 Chinese users a day to surf freely, I'm currently in communication with some of those mainland users, it could easily support exponentially more. So, okay, they've defeated hackers, they've defeated Chinese censors. This is well understood at the State Department. Yet it didn't get a mention in Clinton's speech, because the State Department understands the party's unequivocal message. Falun Gong is non-negotiable. And the problem is that in its present limited form, the State Department's Internet Freedom Initiative is also non-negotiable. Yet it is in the wider business interests of both the U.S. and China to have certain Internet rules of the road. At the same time, it is fundamentally misleading for the State Department, which they did, to present an open Internet as a win-win for the Chinese people, Chinese commerce, and the Chinese Communist Party. It is not. The party has things to hide. It has another 20% increase in mass disturbances. It has live organ harvesting of political and religious prisoners, not just Falun Gong, but Uyghurs, Tibetans, House Christians. Now, while these skeletons rattle in the closet, we've accumulated a decade of evidence that the party intends to use the Internet as a base camp to threaten the West and achieve China's goals. So my concluding point is this: only if the party's internally controlled Internet is threatened will China come to the bargaining table on network intrusion. Now, the State Department has pledged significant funding to enable citizens to circumvent censorship. And the question is, will it award the money to safe choices, groups with thin track records and high burn rates, or will the funding go to the consortium, the party's nightmare, the enemy they created, the only group with the means and motive to actually shatter the Big Brother Internet? And ironically, the State Department's Internet Initiative will force the administration to finally take an implicit position, one way or the other, on the Falun Gong question. Thank you.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Gutmann, for your gripping account, and which really shows the intersection of religious freedom with U.S. security, or another way of saying it is that our national interests overlap with our national ideals. When you see that China's aggression against a peaceful religious group, you can only wonder, how extensive it's going to be when they use it against the rest of us. Mr. Gutmann is a fountain of information on this issue, and hopefully we'll be able to get to more on this topic during the Q&A.